There's a level of calm that makes people nervous just being around you, a stillness so complete that others can feel the power radiating from your silence. And today, you'll discover exactly how to develop this unshakable composure, using a system that was forged in actual life-or-death combat. Have you ever noticed how some people completely fall apart the moment pressure arrives? The instant things don't go according to plan, they panic. Their voice changes, their body language shifts. You can literally watch the fear take over their face. But then there are those rare individuals who become calmer as the pressure increases. While everyone else is losing their mind, they're getting quieter, more focused, more present. The difference isn't talent, it isn't genetics, it isn't some mystical gift you're born with. It's a specific system, a framework for processing pressure that was perfected over 400 years ago by one of history's most legendary warriors. They call it Heijoshin, the practice of maintaining an ordinary mind in extraordinary circumstances. And it's the exact mental framework that allowed Miyamoto Musashi to remain completely composed while facing armed opponents who wanted to kill him, not once, not twice, but in over 60 life-or-death duels where a single moment of panic would have meant his death. But here's what makes this system so powerful for you today. Musashi didn't just use it in sword fights, he used it in every high-pressure situation he encountered: political negotiations, teaching sessions, moments of public scrutiny, personal attacks. And he documented exactly how this system works in his final text, written in a cave when he was 60 years old, knowing he was going to die. But before I show you how this ancient framework can transform the way you handle pressure, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel, hit the like button. And in the comments write the word Heijoshin. This helps me a lot and shows me that you're genuinely interested in developing unshakable composure. Let's go. Chapter 1. The Breaking Point. Meet Daniel. 32 years old, works in corporate sales, smart guy, capable. But he has a problem that's destroying his career and he doesn't even fully realize it yet. Every time a high-stakes meeting arrives, something happens to Daniel. His manager schedules a presentation with executives. Daniel prepares thoroughly. He knows his material, he rehearses, he's objectively ready. But the moment he walks into that conference room and sees those faces looking at him expectantly, everything changes. His heart rate spikes. His palms start sweating. His voice, which sounds confident when he practices alone, now has this subtle shake to it. And here's the worst part. He can feel himself losing control, which makes him panic more, which makes it worse. It's a spiral he can't stop. The presentations always go okay, not terrible, not great, just okay. But Daniel knows he's not performing at his actual level. He's performing at his panic level. And the gap between those two things is costing him everything. Promotions he should have gotten, respect he should have earned, confidence he should feel. So Daniel does what most people do. He tries to manage the symptoms, he practices his breathing, he uses positive affirmations, he visualizes success, and for about 30 seconds before the meeting, it works. He feels calm, ready. But the instant the real pressure hits, all those techniques vanish like smoke. 3 months ago, he had the biggest presentation of his career, a potential client worth millions. His entire company was counting on him. And Daniel completely froze, not dramatically. He didn't run out of the room, but everyone in that meeting could see it. The hesitation, the uncertainty, the fear hiding behind forced confidence. They lost the client. His manager didn't fire him. But Daniel saw the look in his eyes, the realization that Daniel wasn't someone you could count on when it really mattered. And that look hurt more than any criticism ever could. Daniel spent 2 weeks spiraling, questioning everything: his career choice, his capabilities, his future. He was trapped in this loop where his fear of pressure created pressure, which created more fear. Until the day he discovered something that changed everything. He was researching meditation techniques when he stumbled across a translation of Musashi's final work, and one paragraph stopped him cold. Chapter 2. The Ordinary Mind. Musashi wrote, "In the midst of chaos, maintain an ordinary mind. Do not become excited. Do not become passive. Simply be as you are when nothing is happening." Daniel read that sentence 5 times. Simply be as you are when nothing is happening. It seemed impossible. How do you stay normal when everything is exploding around you? But then he kept reading. And Musashi explained something that no modern psychology book had ever told him. The problem isn't that you feel pressure. The problem is that you treat pressure as abnormal. Your mind marks it as an emergency, a deviation from how things should be. And that marking, that mental designation of "this is wrong," is what creates the panic response. Musashi spent his entire life training his mind to perceive deadly combat the same way you perceive brushing your teeth. Not through suppression, not through forced calm, but through a fundamental reframe of what constitutes normal. To him, facing an opponent who wanted to kill him was just another moment, neither special nor terrible, just a moment requiring presence and action. This is where Western psychology finally caught up to Eastern wisdom. A Harvard neuroscientist who has been studying stress response for 15 years discovered something remarkable. Your brain doesn't actually have a separate panic mode. What you experience as panic is just your brain interpreting physiological arousal as dangerous. Your heart rate increases, your focus sharpens, your body mobilizes energy. These exact same physiological changes happen when you're excited about something good. The difference is the story your mind tells about what those sensations mean. If your mind labels them as "I'm losing control," you panic. If your mind labels them as "I'm getting ready," you perform. This distinction is everything, and it's exactly what Musashi mastered. He trained himself to perceive the sensations of pre-combat stress as preparation, not panic. His heart would race, his senses would sharpen, his muscles would tense, and his mind would simply note, "The body is preparing. Good." Daniel realized he'd been fighting the wrong battle. He'd been trying to eliminate the pressure response, trying to feel calm when he should feel activated. But the pressure response isn't the enemy. The interpretation is the enemy. So he started practicing something Musashi called maintaining the everyday mind. Every morning, Daniel would sit for 10 minutes and deliberately recall the physical sensations of pressure. The racing heart, the tight chest, the heightened awareness. And instead of pushing them away, he would practice labeling them neutrally. The body is preparing. This is normal. For the first week, it felt ridiculous. He was sitting in his apartment, perfectly safe, trying to convince his nervous system that stress was normal, but he kept going. And something started to shift. Chapter 3. The Practice of Immovability. 2 weeks into his practice, Daniel had a high-pressure client call, the kind that used to wreck him for hours beforehand. He noticed the familiar sensations starting, heart rate climbing, thoughts accelerating. But this time, instead of spiraling into, "Oh no, it's happening again," his mind offered a different label. The body is preparing. The call went well. Not because Daniel felt calm, but because he stopped fighting the activation. He let his body be ready while his mind stayed present. For the first time, he experienced what Musashi described, an ordinary mind in extraordinary circumstances. But Daniel's real education was just beginning. Because staying composed in a 10-minute phone call is one thing. Maintaining that composure through extended high-pressure situations is entirely different. This is where most people fail. They can hold it together for a few minutes, maybe even an hour. But prolonged pressure exposes every weakness in your mental framework. Musashi knew this. He specifically trained for it. He would meditate for hours in uncomfortable positions. He would fast for days while maintaining his practice schedule. He would engage in mock duels that lasted until his body wanted to quit. And through all of it, he practiced the same thing, maintaining an ordinary mind. There's a specific technique he used that modern science is only now validating. It is called micro-returns to baseline. Every few minutes, regardless of what was happening externally, Musashi would take a single full breath and internally note, "This is an ordinary moment." A Yale behavioral psychologist who has been studying attention and stress regulation for 20 years found that this practice rewires your baseline stress set point. Most people's baseline keeps rising during prolonged pressure. They start at a 3 out of 10 stress level, climb to 5, then 7, then they're operating at an 8 for hours. Their nervous system never gets the signal that it's okay to reset, but when you practice micro-returns, You're essentially telling your nervous system, we can go back to normal anytime. This elevated state isn't permanent. We're choosing to be activated right now, but we're not stuck here. That small distinction prevents the accumulation of stress that leads to breaking points. Daniel started implementing this immediately. Every 15 minutes during his workday, he would take one full breath and think, this is an ordinary moment. It took 5 seconds and it changed everything. 3 weeks later, he had back-to-back presentations scheduled. 4 hours of high-stakes client interactions with almost no breaks. The old Daniel would have been destroyed by hour 2, but this Daniel, practicing micro-returns between each session, stayed present and effective from start to finish. His manager noticed. You're different lately, he said. More solid. What changed? Daniel didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone you've been training your mind using a 400-year-old samurai technique? So he just said, I stopped trying to feel calm. I started accepting feeling ready. Chapter 4. The Internal Weather System. But here's where the practice gets really interesting. And this is where most people abandon the system right before it would transform them completely. Because maintaining composure isn't just about reframing physical sensations. It's about developing a completely different relationship with your internal experience. Musashi described the mind as weather. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, they're all just weather passing through. Sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, but the sky, the awareness that watches the weather, that never changes. That's always clear. Most people identify with the weather. A fearful thought appears and they think, I am afraid. An angry emotion arises and they think, I am angry. But Musashi trained himself to maintain the position of the sky. Thoughts and emotions would move through him, sometimes intense, sometimes calm, and he would simply observe them like clouds passing. This might sound abstract or mystical, but an MIT researcher who has been studying metacognition for 12 years found that this observer position creates measurable changes in brain activity. When you practice observing your thoughts rather than being your thoughts, activity in the prefrontal cortex increases, while activity in the amygdala decreases. Translation: you maintain executive function even when your emotional system is activated. You can feel fear without being controlled by fear. You can experience pressure without losing clarity. The weather gets intense, but the sky stays clear. Daniel started practicing this during his morning sessions. He would sit and deliberately think stressful thoughts, imagine difficult scenarios, feel the emotions rise, and instead of pushing them away or getting caught in them, he would practice noting, fear is present, anxiety is here. The weather is stormy. Not I am afraid, but fear is present. The distinction seems small, but it's the difference between being swept away by a wave and watching a wave from the shore. Both acknowledge the wave. Only one gets drowned by it. After a month of this practice, something remarkable happened. Daniel had a presentation go badly, really badly. Technical difficulties, hostile questions. A client who seemed determined to find fault with everything. The old Daniel would have spent 3 days replaying it in his head, spiraling in shame and anxiety. But this Daniel noticed something different happening. The shame thoughts arose. You failed. Everyone saw you fail. You're not cut out for this. He could feel the familiar pull of the spiral, but he also maintained the observer position. Shame is present. Failure thoughts are here. The weather is very stormy right now. The thoughts didn't stop, but he didn't get swept into them. They were just weather. Painful weather, yes, but weather nonetheless. And weather always changes. This is what Musashi meant by immovability. Not that nothing affects you, but that nothing displaces you from your center. You remain in the observer position no matter what passes through. This is the foundation of unshakable composure. Chapter 5. The Preparation Paradox. By now, Daniel had been practicing for 2 months. His performance at work had noticeably improved. His manager was giving him bigger opportunities. His colleagues were asking what had changed. But Daniel was about to learn the most counterintuitive principle of the entire system. He was preparing for the biggest presentation of his year, potential partnership that could change his career trajectory. He prepared thoroughly. He practiced his micro-returns. He maintained the observer position. He was ready. The morning of the presentation, he woke up and felt completely calm. Too calm, almost disconnected. And that's when he remembered something else Musashi had written. The complete absence of excitement is as dangerous as excessive excitement. The master maintains activation without attachment. This was the trap Daniel hadn't seen coming. He'd gotten so good at staying calm that he'd accidentally trained himself into detachment. He wasn't present anymore. He was protected. And protection is just another form of avoidance. A Stanford neuroscientist who has been studying optimal performance states for 18 years found this exact pattern. Athletes who learn to manage pre-game anxiety sometimes overcorrect into a state of low arousal. They're calm, but they're not activated. They're controlled, but they're not engaged, and their performance suffers because peak performance requires arousal. It just requires arousal without panic. Musashi understood this perfectly. Before his most important duels, he would deliberately cultivate a state he called controlled fire. He wanted his body activated. He wanted his senses sharp. He wanted his mind focused. But he wanted all of that without the mind labeling it as emergency or threat. The distinction is subtle but critical. You're not trying to become a robot. You're trying to become fully alive in high-pressure moments without being overwhelmed by them. You want the intensity, you want the focus, you want the heightened state. You just don't want the panic interpretation that usually comes with it. Daniel realized his mistake. He'd been practicing detachment when he should have been practicing engaged presence. So he adjusted his morning meditation. Instead of just observing thoughts neutrally, he started practicing feeling fully activated while maintaining the observer position. He would recall high-pressure scenarios, feel his body respond, his heart rate climbing, his focus sharpening, his energy mobilizing. And instead of calming it down or disconnecting from it, he would think, "Good, the body is preparing. I want this activation. This is useful energy." The presentation that afternoon was different than anything he'd experienced before. He walked in fully activated, heart pounding, senses sharp, mind clear, but not panicked, not scattered, not overwhelmed. He was present with the intensity, not protected from it. He spoke with an authority he didn't know he had. When challenging questions came, he didn't retreat into careful, defensive answers. He engaged directly, confidently, from that place of controlled fire. His energy filled the room, and everyone could feel it. They got the partnership. After the meeting, his manager pulled him aside. "I don't know what you've been doing differently, but whatever it is, keep doing it. That was the best I've ever seen you perform under pressure." Daniel just smiled. "How do you explain that you've been training your nervous system to love intensity instead of fear it?" Chapter 6. The Social Dimension. But here's where the transformation gets interesting in a way Daniel didn't expect. Other people started reacting to his composure in strange ways. And this is where most people abandon the practice right when it's working. His colleagues who used to joke around with him became quieter in his presence, not hostile, just uncertain. His friend Marcus actually said it out loud. "Dude, you're kind of intense now, like you're calm, but it's almost scary how calm you are." This confused Daniel at first. He'd developed better composure. Wasn't that good? Why were people uncomfortable? But then he remembered another passage from Musashi's writings. "When you have truly mastered yourself, ordinary people will sense something in you they cannot name. It will make them uneasy." This is correct. What Daniel had developed was rare enough that it created a contrast effect. In a world where most people are constantly reacting, constantly agitated, constantly available for emotional drama, someone who maintains genuine composure becomes noticeable. And sometimes unsettling. A Duke University social psychologist who has been studying group dynamics for 16 years found this exact phenomenon. They call it stillness disruption. When most people in a social environment are operating at a certain baseline of reactivity, someone who operates below that baseline disrupts the social equilibrium, not through action, but through non-reaction. Others unconsciously try to get the composed person to react, to match their energy, to validate their level of agitation. And when the person doesn't react, it creates cognitive dissonance. Why isn't he stressed about this? Is something wrong with him? Or is something wrong with me? Daniel noticed this pattern everywhere once he understood it. Colleagues would come to him with urgent problems that weren't actually urgent. They'd escalate their emotional energy, seemingly trying to get him to match it. And when he stayed composed, asking calm questions, offering steady solutions, they'd often get frustrated. "You don't seem to care," one colleague said. "I care," Daniel replied. "I just don't panic. Those are different things." This is the social cost of mastery that nobody talks about. When you genuinely develop unshakable composure, you stop being a mirror for other people's chaos. You stop validating their drama. You stop participating in the collective anxiety that most people swim in without realizing it. And some people will resent you for that. But here's what Musashi understood that took Daniel a while to accept. That resentment is actually confirmation you're doing something right. You're not supposed to fit in with collective dysfunction. You're not supposed to be comfortable in spaces that run on reactivity and drama. Your composure is a mirror that shows others their own lack of composure. And most people don't like what they see in that mirror. That's their problem, not yours. 3 months into his practice, Daniel's manager offered him a promotion. But it came with a warning. "You're going to be managing people now, and I'm going to be honest with you. Some of them are going to find your communication style difficult. You don't react the way they expect. You're going to need to work on that." Daniel almost laughed. Work on what exactly? Work on being more reactive, more scattered, more available for drama? But he just nodded and said he'd consider it. That night he thought about what Musashi would do, and he realized Musashi wouldn't have taken the promotion, not because he couldn't lead, but because leadership that requires you to abandon your center isn't leadership, it's performance. It's pretending. And pretending is exactly what he'd spent 3 months learning to stop doing. So Daniel did something that surprised everyone. He turned down the promotion. He told his manager he appreciated the opportunity, but he wasn't interested in leadership positions that required him to operate differently than he'd learned to operate. He was happy being exceptional at what he did, in the way he did it. His manager tried to talk him out of it. His colleagues thought he was crazy. But Daniel felt more clarity about that decision than he'd felt about anything in years. Chapter 7. The Real War. 6 months into his practice, something shifted in Daniel that he wasn't expecting. The pressure at work stopped bothering him almost entirely, not because work got easier, but because he'd developed such a different relationship with activation that the things that used to trigger panic now just felt like interesting challenges. But that's when the real work revealed itself. Because the pressure at work was never the real problem. It was just the most obvious problem. The real problem was running much deeper. Daniel started noticing his composure cracking in completely different contexts. Arguments with his girlfriend, traffic that made him late, technology that didn't work, small frustrations that shouldn't matter, were revealing that his center wasn't as stable as he thought. This is what Musashi called the ordinary battlefield. The real test of your practice isn't how you handle dramatic high-stakes moments. Those moments have clear boundaries, clear objectives. You can prepare for them. The real test is how you handle the accumulated friction of ordinary life, the 1,000 small irritations that don't justify a stress response but somehow still trigger one. A researcher at Johns Hopkins, who has been studying emotional regulation for 14 years, found that most people can maintain composure during acute stress, but fall apart under chronic minor stress. Your nervous system can handle short bursts of activation followed by recovery. But constant low-level activation without resolution creates a kind of psychological erosion that's harder to manage than occasional crises. Daniel realized he'd been practicing for the wrong battlefield. He'd prepared for presentations and high-stakes moments, but he hadn't prepared for the relentless dailiness of life, the accumulation of small disappointments, the constant need to adapt to things not going according to plan. So he went back to Musashi's writings with new questions, and he found a passage he'd overlooked before. The master's composure is not tested in the duel. It is tested in the moments between duels, in the waiting, in the uncertainty, in the 100 small frustrations of existence that cannot be solved with a sword. Musashi understood that maintaining an ordinary mind doesn't mean being calm during extraordinary moments. It means being ordinary during ordinary moments, not making mountains out of molehills, not adding your emotional reactivity to situations that are simply inconvenient. This is infinitely harder than it sounds, because dramatic moments give you something to push against. Minor frustrations just sit there accumulating, creating this low-grade irritation that never fully resolves but never becomes legitimate enough to address. Daniel started applying his practice to everything. Traffic didn't go from being frustrating to being pleasant, but he stopped adding his anger to it. Technology problems didn't stop being annoying, but he stopped spiraling into frustration about the annoyance. His girlfriend's habits that bothered him didn't change, but he stopped treating every small irritation as a referendum on the relationship. The practice was simple, the same one he'd learned for high-pressure moments. When something frustrated him, he would note, "Frustration is present. This is ordinary weather." Not, "This shouldn't be happening." Not, "Why is this always happening to me?" Just, "Frustration is present." And slowly something remarkable happened. The space between stimulus and response started growing. Someone would cut him off in traffic. The frustration would spike. But before he reacted, there was this tiny gap where he could choose. Do I want to carry this frustration for the next 20 minutes, or do I want to let it be weather? Most times he chose to let it be weather. His girlfriend noticed. "You're different," she said one evening. "You don't get wound up about things anymore. It's kind of amazing, actually." "I still get frustrated," Daniel said. "I just don't become my frustration." She looked at him like she didn't fully understand, and he realized she couldn't understand, because you can't explain the difference between feeling an emotion and being an emotion to someone who's never experienced the distinction. Chapter 8. The Identity Shift. 8 months into his practice, something happened that Daniel didn't see coming. He stopped identifying as someone who struggles with pressure, not through affirmation or positive thinking, but through accumulated evidence that he simply didn't struggle anymore. A high-stakes situation would arise, his body would activate, his mind would stay clear, he would handle it. And afterward, there was no story, no replay, no analysis of how well he managed his anxiety. Because there was no anxiety to manage, just presence, just response, just action. This is what Musashi meant by mastery. It's not that you become good at managing difficult reactions, it's that the difficult reactions stop arising. Your identity shifts from someone who struggles with X to someone for whom X is simply another moment. Daniel's old colleagues sometimes asked him for advice. "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" And Daniel never knew how to answer, because he didn't stay calm. He didn't do anything to his emotional state. He just didn't interpret activation as emergency anymore. His body prepared. His mind stayed present. There was no extra step where he had to calm himself down, because he never got wound up in the first place. This is the marker of internalization, when the practice stops being something you do and becomes something you are. You don't maintain composure. You are composed. There's no gap between the practice and the person anymore. But here's the truth nobody tells you about this level of development. It's lonely, not because you're isolated, but because very few people operate at this frequency, and the people who do recognize each other instantly. Daniel started noticing this in strange ways. He'd be in a meeting full of agitated people, and he'd lock eyes with one other person who was also calm. And there'd be this moment of recognition. You've done the work too. No words, just knowing. Musashi wrote about this phenomenon. He said that masters recognize each other, not through demonstration but through presence. There's a quality of stillness that can't be faked, can't be performed. Either you've done the 10,000 hours of internal work, or you haven't. And those who have can tell instantly. Daniel's manager eventually asked him what happened. "I've been in this business 25 years, he said. "I've seen people develop skills, get better at presentations, learn to manage stress, but I've never seen someone change the way you've changed. It's like you became a different person." "I did," Daniel said simply. "The person who panicked under pressure died. This is who came after." His manager didn't know what to say to that, and Daniel didn't need him to understand, because the transformation wasn't for anyone else's validation. It was for him, for the version of himself that was possible, but buried under years of conditioning and reactivity. Chapter 9. The Permanent Shift. A year after discovering Musashi's system, Daniel sat in a presentation that should have destroyed him. The CEO of his company was there. Two rival teams were competing for the same project. The stakes were enormous. The pressure was intense. Everyone else in the room was visibly tense. Daniel felt his body activate. Heart rate elevated, senses sharp, energy mobilized. And his mind noted, the body is preparing. This is useful energy. He presented for 45 minutes, answered aggressive questions, defended his approach against challenges, and through all of it, he stayed in that place of controlled fire, fully activated, completely present, not protected, not detached, just there. His team got the project. Afterward, the CEO pulled him aside. "I've been watching you for the past year," he said. "Your manager keeps telling me how much you've changed. And he's right. But what interests me is that you didn't just get better at handling pressure. You seem to have a completely different relationship with it. Most people try to avoid pressure. You seem to use it." Daniel smiled. "I learned from someone who had to stay composed or die," he said. "Compared to that, business presentations are just practice." The CEO laughed. But then he got serious. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And if you figure out how to teach it to others, let me know. Because what you have is rare." Daniel thought about that conversation for days. Could he teach this? Could you really transfer a practice that required you to completely rebuild your relationship with internal experience? He wasn't sure, because the techniques were simple, the transformation was brutal. You have to sit with your panic until it's not panic anymore. You have to feel your fear until it's just sensation. You have to observe your thoughts until you realize you're not your thoughts. And most people aren't willing to do that work. They want the result without the process, the composure without the practice, the mastery without the 1,000 small deaths of your reactive identity. But for those who are willing, the system works. Not sometimes. Always. Because it's not based on talent or genetics or lucky circumstances. It's based on repetition and consistency and a fundamental decision to stop being at war with your own nervous system. Musashi proved it works when the stakes are life and death. Daniel proved it works when the stakes are career and identity. And the framework is the same whether you're facing a sword or a spreadsheet. Maintain an ordinary mind. Let your body activate without your mind panicking. Observe the weather without becoming the weather. Return to baseline regularly. Cultivate controlled fire instead of suppressed intensity. That's the system. It's been working for 400 years, and it will work for you, but only if you're willing to put in the work that nobody sees. The daily practice, the 1,000 moments of choosing presence over reactivity, the accumulating evidence that you're not who you used to be. The final reality. Daniel sits in high-pressure situations now and feels something he never felt before. He feels ready, not confident, not calm, not protected, just ready. Whatever comes, he'll handle it, not because he's special, but because he's trained. His colleagues still sometimes comment on his composure. "You're so chill," they say, and Daniel doesn't correct them anymore, because they're looking at the surface. They see calm, they don't see the controlled fire underneath. They don't see the activated nervous system that's been trained to interpret arousal as readiness instead of threat. That's fine. Musashi said the same thing. The master appears relaxed because he is not at war with himself, but the energy is always there. The readiness never leaves. Last month, someone asked Daniel if the practice ever gets easier, if eventually you don't have to work at it anymore. And Daniel gave the only honest answer. The situations get easier because you get stronger, but the practice itself stays the same. Every day you choose, react or respond, panic or presence, weather or sky. "Doesn't that get exhausting?" they asked. "No," Daniel said, "it gets peaceful, because the choice is always clear, and every time you make the right choice, the next choice gets easier. Not because the choice changes, because you change." That's the promise of Musashi's system. Not that life gets easier, not that pressure disappears, but that you become someone who doesn't need life to be easier. Someone who doesn't need pressure to disappear. Someone who can face whatever comes with an ordinary mind and a ready body. The question remains, are you ready for this level of transformation? Because this isn't about learning to stay calm. This is about the death of your reactive self and the birth of your unshakable self. It's about becoming someone who makes others uncomfortable with their composure. Someone who operates at a frequency that most people can't understand because they haven't done the work. And when someone eventually says to you, "Your calmness is kind of scary," you'll know you've finally gotten where you wanted to be. Because that's not criticism. That's confirmation. You've developed something rare enough that it makes the ordinary seem extraordinary. But before you start this journey, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future content that will continue to transform you. Hit the like button, and in the comments, write Heijoshin one more time. Your public declaration that you're ready for the practice that scared even warriors. Remember, the composure that makes others uncomfortable is the only composure worth having. Everything else is just performance. If you've watched this far, thank you very much for your attention. The path of unshakable composure starts with a single decision. Stop treating pressure as abnormal. Start treating it as preparation. Your body knows what to do. It's your mind that needs training. See you in the next video. And remember what Musashi said in his final days. The ultimate aim is to be yourself completely, in every moment, regardless of what that moment contains.